Welcome into the latest episode of Mac and Mose. Andy McNamara, joined by the editor-in-chief of GoDucks.com, Rob Mosley. We're here to discuss Oregon's win over ACC opponent Virginia. It was a final score of 44-26. It was a little bit reminiscent of Game 1 in terms of the way the scoring kind of unfolded for Oregon, but I think outside of a lot of penalties, they feel like they made some progress in this one.
Yeah, they said offensive line communication was a lot better, and which you'd like to see. You'd like to see the young guys make quick improvements as they get, this invaluable game experience. I think that was a big factor in the tempo, really getting ramped up. You saw in that second quarter. Second week in a row, they outscored the opposition 17-0 in the second quarter. I think tempo was a factor in that, which was something they wanted to address coming out of the first game. The safeties, were kind of invisible in the opener, and we saw Brendan Schooler, a new guy in the nickel package, make a pick in the first half. We saw Khalil Oliver come up with one in the second half, so they made some plays they hadn't made in the first game. So there was a lot of signs of progress, but still kind of that finish that they talk about, wanting to kind of keep your foot on the guy's throat, for lack of a better term, and really put some points on the board. That didn't happen for the second week in a row. A game where you thought at one point maybe they could score 60 points didn't happen. So that, still plenty to clean up as you go forward.
Royce Freeman, a big game in this one, 207 yards on 21 carries, had a couple of touchdowns, also caught a couple of passes, and continues to move up the various Oregon career lists. He's just a true junior in the second game of his junior season, but he's gonna shatter a lot of records if he continues to have the production that he's had early on. Big game for him. Dakota Prukop looked more comfortable, was willing to take some shots downfield. Maybe we talked about it a little bit coming into the game, that not that he needed to start taking risks, but trust his receivers a little bit in single coverage, and he showed the willingness to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those pitch plays on runs, you're used to seeing that stuff behind the line of scrimmage, but he had at least one ahead of the line of scrimmage where he pitched out, and that was Dwayne Stanford did a good job on that play of trailing the play to keep himself alive as a pitch man. It's not something you're used to seeing, but it was within the scope of the Oregon offense. But I've been preaching for weeks and months that Dakota was a guy who wasn't going to be a huge risk taker, and he kind of turned that on its head in that game. I mean, there was a couple throws. The third and long conversion to Devin Allen, kind of threw it up there to try to let his guy make a play, and Devin made a play. And some of those run plays, he took maybe bigger risks than I would have anticipated. So yeah, kind of a different dimension to his game than I was anticipating seeing. If you look at various analysis websites, people that break down, score guys' games, he graded out really, really well. So that was encouraging to see.
He leads all Power 5 quarterbacks in yardage on third down, also has the best passer efficiency on third down. That's been something that's been a positive through 2 weeks now for Prukop. 6 touchdowns on the season to 6 different receivers, so he's getting everybody involved. No turnovers to this point for Prukop, and will have obviously his biggest test, as will the rest of the Oregon Ducks, coming up against Nebraska. The receiving core in this one, Darren Carrington made 5 grabs. Didn't have many long plays in this one, so his yardage total wasn't as much as it's been. But a good job, I think, by the offense of sort of distributing the ball. Great to see Dwayne Stanford back in the end zone. He had a couple big grabs. He also had a rush on that pitch play that you spoke of. Farrell Brown gets a touchdown, and nobody was more excited than Farrell, I think, to really get that out of the way and feel now truly like he is completely back from the injury he suffered 2 years ago.
Both he and Devin Allen, who reached the end zone later in the game, expressed that Devin's coming back from the Olympic experience, and there was a question of how quickly he'd be kind of assimilated back into things, and then Farrell obviously coming off the knee injury. That for both of them, scoring a touchdown, reaching the end zone really capped that put a cap on sort of the comebacks they were trying to make. So that was great to see. And with Farrell, with Johnny Munt not suited up, with Evan Bayless not playing for the second week in a row, Farrell, they needed to lean on Farrell a lot. They had some contingency plans available just in case, but he ended up playing 70, 75 plays, whatever it was. And I think he answered questions for himself in that regard too, that he can hold up with that level of workload. And, with the talent, with how hard he is to bring down, I mean, you see, he can't be tackled by one guy. And also how effective a blocker he is. That's easy to overlook, but certainly the coaches respect just how much, and in the run game he opens things up. The more he can be available, the better.
One offensive player that I think we expected more to see more from to this point has certainly done some damage on special teams as a returner is Charles Nelson. He's been out there a lot, and they haven't gotten a ton of production out of him as a receiver, making the switch over to defense. He's a guy that I think he has so many tools. He's a potentially just such a big weapon for this team. What do you think that Oregon has to do to get Charles involved a little bit more on offense? He's out there, as I mentioned, all the time, but just that he's not making the plays we're used to seeing him make.
It's not for lack of trying, in my mind. I mean, they've tried to rush him a few times. They're targeting him in the passing game. It seems like for whatever reason, that the chemistry between Prukop and Nelson that isn't there that Prukop's developed with some other guys. So. But like you say, Charles is such a valuable weapon. I mean, I think they'll keep going to the well. You expect that to start clicking at some point. I fully expect them to keep going to him, keep trying to work the ball to him, because you can see on the return game, he bobbled the first punt this past week after muffing the one with the week before. So there's some risk there with Charles. But when he does get his hands on the ball, he's so explosive. Yeah. He's still one of the top-ranked kickoff returners and punt returners in the country. You want the ball in his hands, and so I expect him to keep trying to do so.
Switching over to defense now, very similar to the first game in that there were some head-scratching moments when the seas parted and the opposition got some big plays. But on the flip side, lots of sacks once again, 6 sacks in this game for the Oregon defense. A couple of them coming from interior linemen with Austin Malawata and Drayton Carlberg, both getting in there. So some encouraging signs. Brady Hoke played a ton of guys in this game. I mean, it was amazing to see how often it was almost like a hockey game with line changes on the defense for Oregon in this one. And I have to wonder if some of that is by design. That's the type of defense that Oregon is going to run, or if we're still in that sort of feeling out stage where he's trying to evaluate exactly what the various players are able to give him in certain roles.
Yeah, Mark Helfrich was asked Sunday night after watching the game on film. Drayton Carlberg, who you mentioned, Gus Cumberlander gets his first sack. Where do they fit in the rotation coming out of that? And Helf said, hey, they need to look at guys and see who their best guys are. So I think they're still trying to figure some things out. Not to be overlooked, this offense, this Virginia offense, was based on the Mike Leach air raid offense. Big wide splits in the offensive line to spread out the offense. And we saw Washington State last year against Oregon have some success running the ball. You gear up to stop the pass,
yeah, exactly.
Then they run it at you. A lot of the rushing yards Virginia got. Oregon's got a 3-touchdown lead at that point. So, if somebody's willing to keep it on the ground and run it at you and keep the clock running, you don't necessarily mind that. You want to take away an offense's strengths. In this case, it was some big, talented wide receivers, and the Ducks really kept all those guys from hurting them. There were some drops that helped too, don't get me wrong, but it felt to me like, against an air raid offense, if they're going to attack you between the tackles with the run game, you'll take that.
You mentioned the safeties, Schooler and Oliver, guys that are backups at that position, at least at this point in the season, making big plays. The corners in this one I thought did a really good job. Arion Springs had a couple of really nice breakups. Sort of a mysterious penalty. I didn't understand why he was flagged for pass interference on one call. But outside of that, I thought he played a really solid game. Ugo Amadi, also, he had contested some balls in that first game that ended up being receptions for some big plays. But again, his coverage, he was there. He was in position to make plays. And if those guys can continue to play, because that was a talented, as you mentioned, not only the scheme, but the quarterback for Virginia came in. I mean, he's a decent quarterback, and the Ducks were basically able to make him look fairly average. I think he was, just barely over 50% completion rate, and he had the 2 interceptions. So that defensive backfield, I think, definitely has to feel encouraged by this game.
Yeah, Oregon had a 50-50 run-pass split, basically, and that's what they want to see. Virginia had a 50-50 run-pass split, and if you're an air raid offense, I don't think that's what you want to see. Yeah. I want to, you really want that tilted toward your passing yards because that's how you're going to make your hay. The secondary continues to progress. Front seven continues to progress, although without Johnny Reagan, I think they missed him. Some of that stuff with the runs up the middle, you'd like to think that if a senior linebacker like Johnny Reagan was in there, he could have helped with some of that. There were some gap assignments where it looked like two guys were filling the same gap. Maybe if you have a Johnny Reagan in there, that's not happening. So some caveats there, but overall, we knew this was going to be kind of a rebuilding year for this defense, and you just want to see them make progress. And ultimately, I feel like right now, Oregon football is exactly who we thought they were going to be right now. There's a young offensive line that's going to, you're going to need to help groom them, help mask that for a few games, and a rebuilding defense. You're going to need to help mask that for at least a few games. But there's more than enough talent at the offensive skill positions to do all that. And so right now, it's exactly what you're seeing. I mean, the third quarter the other night, Virginia's trying to get back in the game, scores a couple times, 77 yards to Devin Allen, 85 yards by Royce Freeman. There's just so much talent at the skill positions that even though there may be some imperfections at other spots, there's enough talent to overcome some of that stuff. Now, it's going to get harder as the level of competition increases, beginning this week against Nebraska. But right now, if you'd say, this is, I come back to it, I think this is kind of who we thought Oregon was going to be, at least in the early going.
I think Mark Helfrich talked about it a little bit last night in his local press conference about how each unit needs to go out and win their battle, and that's going to help the big picture. Strength on right now. There's experience. There's some inexperience on the line, as you mentioned, but there's just so many playmakers on offense. I think special teams is another area where Oregon can have an advantage on a consistent basis as you go throughout the schedule with not only the return game and Charles Nelson, but a guy that's really stood out to me. I know it's only 2 games, but the early leader in the clubhouse for most improved player for me is Tony Brooks James.
Yeah.
Both as a weapon in situational moments on offense, but in the return game, he can return the ball, but as the gunner, they call it the duck on the Oregon special teams, his ability to get downfield and make tackles, and when you see him and Charles just flying down on coverage units, I mean, that to me is sort of something that's not really talked about a whole lot, and it could really be a difference maker in some close games for this team.
Yeah, he had a penalty in this game, but if I see somebody messing with Devin Allen, I probably want a teammate jumping in. It's like when on a hockey team, when somebody's messing with one of your stars, somebody else has to jump in and get your star out of trouble there. So Tony took one for the team, and let's not forget that Tony's not only football teammates with Devin, he's track and field teammates with Devin, so he's going to take it personally if somebody's messing with Devin Allen. So that game got a little chippy, it got a little frisky. Not surprising to see the penalties, I think, on both sides because of that, including the one Tony got. But yeah, he really turned a corner. I think we thought he was showing signs of that in fall, but also that he'd showed some signs earlier. So we weren't quite sure whether he was ready to actually translate that over to the field. So the fact that he's able to do that is really cool.
We'll be back to preview Oregon's next matchup. It's a big one, Nebraska. It's a 12:30 local kickoff Pacific time. I should say local in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's 2:30, but for most Oregon fans on the West Coast, it'll be a 12:30 kickoff on ABC. So we'll put a wrap on Virginia. The Ducks now 2-0. They've won 8 straight regular season games. No small feat. They moved up a couple spots in the poll. The AP Top 25, the Ducks are now ranked number 22 as they head to Lincoln, Nebraska. So Rob and I will be back later in the week to preview that one. Until next time, we'll see you.